Hello, welcome everyone to our first talk. Today we're going to talk about Freezed, a Dart library package that is going to surely help you level up your code safety. But before we actually get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Pedro Belfort. As I said a couple of minutes ago, I am originally from Brazil. I have 5 years of experience with native mobile development. More recently, I got into Flutter, which for me is game changer because it gives you the best mobile development experience so far in the market nowadays. I'm also a senior Flutter engineer at About You. This is a fashion tech unicorn company based in Hamburg, Germany. And make sure to check out our app. It's amazing. So if you're looking for new clothes or just a gift to our friends, we might have whatever you need. So it's available for both Android and iOS, and it has been written completely in Flutter. I'm also the co-founder and engineer at Lutec. We are a software house specialized in mobile applications. So whether if you are you need an extra pair of hands for a new project, or if you are building a new app from scratch, we might be able to help. So make sure to check out our website. This is the QR code for it. All right, so let's get started. As most things in Flutter, you probably got started like this: Flutter create. But instead of calling my new app, my new fictitious app, my awesome app, let's just give it a nicer name. Let's call it Iceberg. Well, Iceberg is a fictitious e-commerce app. As many e-commerce apps, you're gonna have to deal with a bunch of features. So we have our product catalog, we have our cart, loyalty program, and many other features that you're gonna have to develop until you actually deploy it into production. Now, just to give you some context, let's say that this is the architecture that I decided to use for my application. We have a presentation layer, we have a business logic, data access, and data source, and we are using the block pattern for state management. Now, Flutter is amazing because it provides you with a bunch of features, which enables you to build a very complex UI in a very, very straightforward way. So I would say that most of the problems actually arise when you're actually dealing with state management. And more than that, well, today it's you. 1 month from now, maybe there are 2 people on your team. 3 months from now, there are 2 people plus 2 others that you barely know and might be doing crazy things. And 12 months from now, you might be all over the place with a remote team, with different mindsets, different cultures, etc. So things can get pretty messy. What can possibly go wrong with that, right? Well, I'll tell you 4 things that might go wrong with that. So first, you might pass around data which might change unexpectedly. Second, you might forget to cover some state in your widget. You might spend too much time with boilerplate code. Or you might just write code that is difficult to read and maintain whenever. Okay, so when we talk about passing around data which might change unexpectedly, well, this is probably ring a bell to many people. How do we tackle this? We are looking into immutability. And thankfully, Dart actually provides us with a very nice set of tools and keywords to actually tackle this problem. So of course, let's start with something very simple here, just for simplicity's sake, right? So let's say that I have a user object with the first name and the last name. Now, obviously, this class on the left is not immutable yet, but we're going to do it. So this means that I can just go ahead, I can declare my user, which is a white walker, and I can change its name to Moon if I want to. Now, how would I tackle it in Dart? I can just use the final keyword in front of my type string. And now the compiler will tell me that it cannot be used as a setter because it's final. If I go 1 step ahead, I can also make this user constant. And if I actually declare another user who is constant and has the same first name and last name, I get value equality. If I go further, I can also annotate it with the immutable decorator. Now, what this is going to do is Basically, it's going to tell your developer that, well, if you are actually including a new property that is not final, it's not supposed to be like that. So one or more of these instance fields aren't final, in this case, user address. But be aware, this is not enforcing anything. It's just giving a warning. If you go one step further, you're probably going to add some required decorators and also some assertions to make sure that neither the first name, last name, or address can be null. All right, so in the end, I cannot change the first name, I cannot change the last name, or the address. All right, so when we talk about forget to cover some state, minutes ago, we just talked about how many features probably an e-commerce application is going to have. Product, cart, categories, rewards, etc. Can you imagine how many states we're going to have to manage here? It can be very, very cumbersome, and it can be very confusing very fast. So wouldn't it be nice in the product catalog, for instance, if we could, let's say, if we had, for instance, this triad, there you go. If we had these three states here, which is a very common case for any page, we have the loading, we have the success, and we have the failure states for the product catalog, right? Now, how would we write this with vanilla Dart and using, let's say, the block, the Flutter block package? Well, we probably have something more or less between these lines, right? So we would have an abstract class calling, I'm going to call it product catalog state. And you would have three other classes that would extend from this base class, right? And they would represent the possible three states of your page. I have marked them also with some colored circles on the left, just to make it easier to visualize what I'm trying to say here, okay? So this is how it would look like in Dart. And of course, you would have to cover these in your widget. So let's say that I have, for instance, a content widget, and inside it, I have my build method, of course, and I have a builder. And inside this builder, I have to address each state. So in this case, if my product catalog is loading, I have to show a circular progress indicator. If my product catalog has loaded successfully, well, I have to render my product stream. Now, if I have a failure in this load process, then I have to show a failure placeholder, right? Pretty intuitive. What's the problem with this so far? Just one tiny annoying thing. Here, actually, the compiler is gonna complain and give you a warning saying that you have to return something. It doesn't recognize that, in this case, you have covered every state. This can be pretty annoying, but you can solve it very easily with, for instance, a size box, and that's it. Because you know that the fallback state is never gonna happen because you have covered every state before it, right? So what about if we went back to this class and we added two new states? Let's say that the PM told you, okay, now we need the empty and we need the initial states. Now, this was your widget, and these were the states that you had. So if you go to your block and you add those new states, you have to make sure you remember and come back here and address every new possible state. You have to remember this. Your teammate has to remember this, right? And well, if you have only two new states, that might be very trivial. But imagine if you have a much more complex feature or UI to build. And what if your fallback was actually the failure placeholder, and you forget to come back here and update your widget? Then all the new states would fall into this new category of failure placeholder. And that wouldn't be pretty, would it? So in theory, wouldn't it be nice if we could have a switch saying, okay, for this state, I have this possibility. So I have the loading progress, load success, and load failure. And the compiler actually tells you that you have covered every state and understands it, right? So if you modify anything, all right, you come back here and you cover the new states. And if you have covered everything, that's all right. Like you did your job, right? So it would be very nice if we have, oops, you forgot to cover the new initial and empty states in this case. Our next problem is that you might spend too much time with boilerplate code. And it would be so nice if you had some of these code that you expect auto-generated for you. It could be through, let's say, code generation. Why not? Okay, so let's say here that I am in my block and I have my famous map event to state function. And in this case, this is a very, very isolated example. Let's say that I want to update a user profile, and I am concerned in giving the fastest feedback possible to the user. So I want to do everything local. I'm not loading anything, okay? So I have this user profile, I already have this object, right? And I just want to update one single property of this object. Well, with Vanilla Dart, what you would have to do is, well, one of the things you could do actually is instantiate a new user profile, and you can pass in all the properties again and change only one of them, the one that you're interested in, okay? But what we usually see in Flutter is the copy with method. And this method is pretty cool because it allows you to just go to your object and say, okay, dot copy with, and then pass in the new value of the property that you're interested in, right? But this method is not created automatically for you, which means that if you are in a new class, you also have to remember to create this method, for each class that you're interested in. And also, let's say, if you have to maintain the class and update it and include a new property, you have to go back, remember that you have to add a new property, a new argument to the copy with method. And let's not forget that this method, the way it's written, it does not support null values. So what if you want to set something for null, as null? Okay, I talked about copy with, but what about all those assertions that we've seen minutes ago? What about the quality operator? What about the hash code? What about toString? There's so many things that you would have to override, and they are like, you're going to do the same process over and over again. Wouldn't it be nice if you just had everything you needed out of the box? Okay, hold on. Our fourth issue. So this is very abstract, I know. But basically, we are looking into predictability. So it doesn't matter if I'm writing the product catalog, the card, or the customer service. In the end, you want to have some degree of familiarity in each feature that you visit. You want to know more or less how you're going to build these things. What are the conventions? How you must proceed? Where you have to look at in order to figure out how a new state is created, how a business logic is done, right? So you want to have some degree of familiarity in each feature that you visit and you are about to build. So wouldn't it be nice if you actually had the answers for how is this state updated? Which are the possible states for my page? What are the assumptions I can make for immutable objects? What are the tools I have to work with? So this is something that you not always have the answer. And it would be great for your workflow and for your team if you actually manage somehow to enforce these answers in a very consistent way. Well, say hello to Freezed. This package is amazing. But before I actually talk about the package itself, I want to talk about its creator. This is Rémi, and you might know him for other packages. He did an amazing job in the Flutter community. So he's also the author from Provider, Riverpod, Flutter Hooks, and Freezed, of course. So what do you get with that? Well, Freezed gives you a bunch of convenience for your development workflow. So out of the box, what do you get with it? You get immutability by default. You get union and sealed classes. You get exhaustive switch, automatic value quality, copy with supporting new values, automatic toString override, property destructuring, early access to the late keyword, non-null by default, and a very neat integration with the JSON serializable if you're handling JSON, which most of you are probably. And let's not forget, it gives you a very elegant syntax that speeds up your workflow. And I'm gonna show you a little bit of it. Well, if you want to integrate your project with Freeze, you have to insert these dependencies. So basically, Freeze annotation and the build running, of course, because this is a code generation based package, and Freeze. And these versions here, I put them here if you are not able to migrate to Flutter 2.0 yet, okay? So you would use these versions. Okay, so let's get back to Iceberg. And let's say that I'm gonna build my first and maybe one of the most important features, the product catalog. And what better way to start it than my model, product. As we've seen, this would be the way, like very simple way of writing the product object in pure Dart, okay? So again, I have my ID, name, and price. They're all final. They all have the required annotation. And I also included the immutable decorator on the top to make sure that this object does never have a state. All right, so this is how it would look like after Freeze, if you had to refactor this to Freeze. Take a moment to look at it. But don't worry, I'm gonna go step by step here and show you what changed. The first thing that you might have noticed is that all the properties are not declared anymore within the class, right? So you're just declaring a factory constructor, right? Your class became an abstract class, but be aware, the abstract keyword is not needed anymore in the modern versions of Freeze. You're also putting a mix-in product that is auto-generated for you. As I said, now it's a factory constructor. And you have a private implementation of the product class. Of course, you have to annotate it with the Freeze decorator. So the code generation tool knows that it has to generate code for this specific class. And you have to import Freeze annotation, of course, and write this part product freeze.art. Okay, if you do all this and then, of course, you run your build runner, this is going to generate code for you. But just a pro tip before we do it, also consider importing foundation, because if you do so, it will give you some convenience debugging properties that is going to make your class look much better in Flutter's dev tool. So definitely worth it. As I said, Flutter pub run build runner build. After you reach this command, it's going to generate for you a lot of code. But don't worry, you don't have to read this. I just want to show you how much code is being auto-generated for you, okay? Now, I want to highlight a couple of nice parts that are within this code. It generates for you an identity. It also generates for you a product tear-off. This is the copy width that we talked about. And this is what you get when you import foundation. And of course, the private implementation of the product class. Now, let's zoom in here. Okay, so this is our private product class. As you can see, we have the same factory constructor, but now we have the properties. And more interestingly, here we have getters, which make these fields immutable. You cannot set them from outside. And you also get the copy with method we talked about. Now, what about this other implementation of product? What do you get with that? Well, first, you also get the mix-in that I mentioned for when you import foundation. And you get the toString override. Gives you a very nice view of the class and its properties. You also get equality operator override and hash code. And these are the debuggable properties. In other words, by writing this, you get this. Non-null by default. You don't need to write those assertions anymore. It's non-null by default. This is especially useful if you cannot migrate to Flutter 2.0 yet. You get immutability by default. So just by writing this, no one can change ID, name, nor price. Automatic toString override. Automatic value equality, which is very handy if you're dealing with states. You also get, for you, the copy with method. Let's say that I have a drone product and I just want to update its price. Well, that's super easy. I just have to say drone, copy with, price, and the new price. There you go. And of course, the previous object is not equal to the new one because the price has changed. Now, let's say that I said that it also supports new values. So we have to modify a little bit our class on the left. Let's say that now I have an image URL, which is a string, but it can be null. And as you can see, I have already declared my drone without an image URL. So it supports null values. And I could pass here in the image URL a null if I want, or I could pass an image. But here is where it truly shines. Remember our states for the product catalog. We had the failure, loading failure, and success states. Previously in Dart, you write it this way. Now, with freezed, this would become this. Well, say hello to union and sealed classes. Look how much better it reads. You have your loading, success, and failure all nested within your product catalog states. Now you have factory constructors to declare them. And freeze is actually implementing the states, which now can be private. And one of the biggest advantages that we get from that is what we're about to see. Remember how we had to declare our states in our widget inside our builder. So we have the loading progress, load success, and load failure, and you have to typecast that, right? Now you get an exhaustive switch with the when method. So you would say, okay, state, I would like to return when my state is loading, I'm going to return a circular progress indicator. If it's success, then I'm going to return a product stream, failure placeholder. Another thing that you might notice is that we also get property destructuring. And this is why you don't really need your state to be public anymore, because you have all the properties you need destructured for you. So in the success, I don't need to verify if it's a product catalog success state, for instance. You can just say, okay, my products, I want to render a product stream with these products. All right, and what about new states? Let's say that I have empty and initial. This is how you would modify your product catalog state, just new factory constructors. And you would get compile time error and warning saying, okay, the parameter empty is required. The parameter initial is required. And you would have to go back to your widget and include those states in your when method. So you do have exhaustive switch compile time. And you know, all these features, they were heavily inspired in Kotlin. Most you probably know, but Kotlin has support to data classes, which allows us to declare, for instance, name and age, and the compiler automatically derives the following members from all properties declared in the primary constructor. So you get the equals similar to what freeze does. So you get the equals, you get the toString, you get the copy function and component end out of the box. Kotlin also supports sealed classes. So you would have, let's say, 3 classes here that extend from expression. And the nice thing about this is that all the subclasses or sealed classes are known at compile time, just as freeze gives us for Dart. Guys, in summary, so for the first problem we talked about, you get immutability by default with freeze. So you never forget to cover any case, because you get union, with union and sealed classes, you get the exhaustive switch. You never have to spend too much time with boilerplate code anymore, because you get automatic toString override, you get the copy with methods, and you get property structuring for you. And your code is going to be much more predictable because you have automatic value equality, and the properties are non-null by default. So you don't have to rely on conventions anymore. If you're using freeze, you can be assured that you're going to have this set of behavior for sure. Well, we talked about most of these features that freeze offers us, right? But those are not exhaustive, okay? So we didn't even mention the early access to the late keyword or the amazing integration that it has with JSON serializable. Not only that, there's just so much more. So you also get custom getters and methods. You get deep copy, constructor tear off, auto decorators. For instance, you can put deprecated. You can also make assertions. And you can also break the rules and say that a required property is actually nullable. You get mixed scenes in your faces. And part of other powerful methods like maybe when and map and maybe map, which allows you to actually use your states, which now can't be private, but you can actually make use of the state object itself. So make sure to check it out, because there's a lot more to cover. And of course, as anything in life, there are trade-offs. But this is more of my personal opinion, to be honest. One of the things I don't like about it is the fact that your assertions now, they are based on string literals. So this is how you would write that name cannot be empty with freeze. And this is very prone to error, but as when you generate the code, you're going to figure it out. So this should not be a huge problem or a no-go for you. Another issue that I see with freeze is that you have frequent code generation, and that can be very bulky, because it's another thing that you have to do in your workflow. You're always generating code all the time. And especially if your code base is big, it can take up a long time. So this can be easily tackled as well. Like you can just declare a new file, build YAML, for instance, and there you can optimize which code is going to be scanned, and is going to be the base for generating your freeze classes. You can come up with a suffix, for instance. This is something that we ran into in About You, and in the end, like it's just something that we had to optimize. And we managed to reduce the build time and the code generation time, and keep all the good things that come with freeze. So it's just one more thing that you have to consider, of course. And of course, it's one more thing for project newcomers. So anyone who is onboarding your team, you're gonna have to teach them how to freeze, how is your new workflow. But again, this is something that you probably have to do with a bunch of other technologies as well. If you're using something like RX Dart, it's a different way of programming, and well, many other packages that are out there. So this is just something that you might keep in mind. But again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, if you have any questions, it's the time for it.